A king who never lost an argument. A king so sharp, so relentless in debate, that philosophers refused to even face him anymore. He had a Greek name, a Greek army, a Greek throne. But one day, he sat down across from a monk in orange robes and asked a question that no one could answer. Who am I? The monk's answer would change how millions of people understand the self, death, and what happens after we die. And it almost got lost to history completely. This isn't a myth. This isn't a parable someone made up to teach a lesson. This is a real king, a real war of ideas, recorded, debated, and preserved for over 2,000 years. His name was Menander. The Buddhists called him Milinda. He ruled an empire carved out of Alexander the Great's leftover conquests, Greek blood, Greek philosophy, sitting on a throne in the heart of ancient India. And what happened when that Greek mind collided with Buddhist wisdom didn't just make history. It cracked open one of the deepest questions a human being can ask. Does the self even exist? Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you might not be sure who's asking that question either. Rewind to the 2nd century BCE. Alexander the Great is long dead. His empire has shattered into pieces. But in the far eastern edges of that broken empire, in what is now Pakistan and parts of Afghanistan, something strange survived. Greek kings, Greek cities, Greek coins stamped with owls and gods. Except now, surrounded by an ocean of Indian culture, language, and religion. One of these kings was Menander. He didn't inherit a small, forgotten outpost. He built one of the largest and most powerful Indo-Greek kingdoms in history. His capital, Sagala, was rich, cultured, and cosmopolitan. His coins have been found scattered across a territory so vast that historians still argue about exactly how far his armies reached. But here's what set him apart. Menander wasn't just a warrior, he was a thinker. Ancient sources describe him as brilliant, a king who loved philosophy, who surrounded himself with scholars, who could out-argue anyone put in front of him. And that became a problem, because Menander had a habit. He would summon philosophers, priests, and teachers to his court and destroy their arguments, one by one, publicly. Word spread. Eventually, no one wanted to challenge him anymore. Imagine that. A king so intellectually dangerous that the wise men of his kingdom started avoiding his court altogether. He had conquered land. Now there was nothing left to conquer except an idea he couldn't defeat. Until one man agreed to sit across from him. A Buddhist monk. His name was Nagasena. Here's where the story stops being a simple royal anecdote and becomes something much stranger. Because this wasn't a fair fight. Not on paper. Menander was a king, a trained debater, a man raised on Greek logic, rhetoric, and argument, the same intellectual tradition that gave the world Socrates and Aristotle. Nagasena was a monk, no army, no throne, no political power. But before the debate even began, something unusual happened. Menander made a promise. He agreed to argue as a philosopher, not as a king. That distinction mattered enormously, because in his court, disagreeing with a king could get you executed. Menander understood that if Nagasena had to fear for his life every time he gave an honest answer, the debate would be worthless. So he set the terms himself: speak freely, argue honestly, no consequences. It's a small detail, but think about what it reveals. A conqueror, a man who had every advantage of power, voluntarily stripped himself of that power so the argument could be real. He didn't want to win, he wanted the truth. And then Nagasena asked him something back before they even started. He asked the king, "How shall I be addressed? What is your name?" Milinda answered plainly, "I am called Menander." And Nagasena said something that stopped the room cold. "There is no person here called Menander." The king laughed it off, but the monk wasn't joking. That single sentence was the opening move of one of the most famous philosophical debates in human history. And it was about to take apart everything Menander thought he knew about himself. So what did Nagasena actually mean? Milinda pushed back immediately. If there's no Menander, he said, then who am I speaking to right now? Who gives orders in this kingdom? Who are you even talking to? Nagasena didn't answer directly. Instead, he asked the king a question about something completely different. He asked about the king's chariot. Your Majesty, you arrived here by chariot. Tell me, is the wheel the chariot? No, said Milinda. Is the axle the chariot, the frame, the reins, the yoke? Each time Milinda said no. Then, is the chariot all of these parts put together? Still no, because if you disassembled it completely, wheels here, axle there, frame in a pile, no reasonable person would point at the scattered pieces and say, there's the chariot. So Nagasena asked the obvious question. Then where is the chariot? Milinda had no answer. And that was the point. Chariot isn't a thing that exists on its own, somewhere separate from its parts. It's a label, a convenient name we give to a particular arrangement of wheels, axle, and frame, working together for a purpose. Take away the arrangement, and the chariot disappears, not because something was destroyed, but because it was never a separate thing to begin with. Then Nagasena turned that same idea back on the king. Just as chariot is a name for wheels and axle and frame arranged a certain way, Menander is a name for a body, feelings, perceptions, thoughts, and consciousness arranged a certain way. There is no fixed, separate self hiding underneath, only the parts and the name we give them. This is one of the earliest and clearest illustrations of a core Buddhist teaching, anatta or non-self. The idea that what we call I isn't a solid, unchanging thing living inside us, it's a process, a pattern, a name for something constantly shifting. Milinda wasn't satisfied, he kept pushing. If there's no self, he asked, then who is reborn after death? What continues from one life to the next if there's no soul to carry across? Nagasena answered with another image. He compared it to lighting one lamp from the flame of another. Is the new flame the same flame as the old one? Not exactly. Is it a completely different flame with no connection at all? Also no. Something continues, but nothing solid transfers. Cause and effect ripple forward, without any unchanging thing riding along for the journey. This is the strange, slippery territory Nagasena kept guiding the king toward. Not comforting certainty, not a simple yes or no. Something harder, something that demanded the king sit with discomfort instead of resolving it. And Milinda, trained to win every argument he'd ever entered, found himself, for the first time, not trying to win. He was trying to understand. Here's the part almost nobody talks about. This debate didn't stay in the palace. It didn't fade into legend and disappear. It was written down. The text became known as the Milinda Panha, the questions of Milinda. And it didn't just record one exchange about chariots and selfhood. It recorded dozens of questions, hard ones, the kind of questions that still make philosophers uncomfortable today. How can karma be fair if the person experiencing the consequences isn't technically the same person who caused them? If there's no soul, what exactly gets punished or rewarded across lifetimes? Can something be real if it has no physical form, no shape, no weight? What is nirvana, and how can you point to something that isn't a place, isn't a thing, isn't a person, and yet isn't nothing either? Every time Milinda pressed, every time Nagasena answered with an image, a parable, a piece of ordinary life turned into philosophy, fire, chariots, mangoes, rivers, medicine. And here's the detail that should genuinely unsettle you. Some later Buddhist traditions claim that Menander, this Greek king, this master of Western logic, didn't just enjoy the debate. They claim he became a follower of the Buddhist path. Some accounts even suggest that after his death, several cities claimed the honor of holding his remains, the same way ancient Greek cities once fought over relics of their heroes. A Western king, buried or at least remembered the way the Buddha himself was remembered. Historians still debate how much of this is fact and how much is legend built up over centuries. But here's what isn't in dispute. Somewhere in the 2nd century BCE, in a kingdom balanced between two civilizations, a conversation happened that was so powerful, so disruptive, that people felt compelled to write it down and protect it for over 2,000 years. Why? What was it about this particular conversation that made it worth preserving above almost everything else from that era? Maybe because it wasn't really about a king, or a monk, or even about Buddhism. Maybe it was about something every single person listening to this right now still hasn't figured out. Think about what actually happened in that room. The most powerful man in the kingdom, a man who could order anyone's death with a single word, sat down and let a monk with no army, no wealth, and no political standing dismantle his sense of self, piece by piece. And he didn't walk away angry. He walked away changed. That's the part that should stop you. Not the philosophy, not the chariot metaphor, not even the questions about rebirth. It's the fact that a man with absolute power chose curiosity over control. Most people, when their sense of self is challenged, get defensive. They dig in. They protect the story they've built about who they are because that story feels like safety. Melinda did the opposite. He kept asking, even when the answers unsettled him, even when there was no clean, comfortable resolution waiting at the end. And maybe that's the real hidden truth in this story. Not that the self is an illusion, not that you are just a name for a chariot's worth of moving parts. The real truth is smaller and somehow heavier. Most of us will go our entire lives without ever asking the question Melinda asked. We'll wake up, answer to our name, build a career around that name, fall in love under that name, and die still believing that name was ever a fixed, solid thing to begin with. A king had to lose an argument to discover that. What would it take for you? Because somewhere between the wheels and the axle and the frame, something is riding through your life right now, answering to your name. The question Nagasena asked 22 centuries ago is still sitting there, unanswered, waiting for you. Who exactly is that?